And I'm gonna be high.
Good on you, Donald. I'm the Rocket Man, yeah.
I'm a rocket man. And I'm gonna be
Rocket Man.
I'm a rocket man.
All right, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Logistics. We have the esteemed Eric Johnson today. He is with JOC. Maybe you can introduce your full title and what you do for work, but I appreciate you making time for me, and I think this would be a good discussion. We're going to cover AI and media. We're going to talk about tariffs. We're going to talk about the truckload markets, data providers, rating tools, all of it, because I got him here. Why not ask? So, Eric, how you doing?
Good. I think that's the first time I've ever been called esteemed. I feel like I should be wearing like a tweed blazer or something like that. So
I thought you would be.
Yeah.
But no, I'm just kidding.
I appreciate it though. That's very nice of you. Super excited to be here. I've watched a bunch of the episodes of your show, so I feel like, a part of an illustrious group here. I'm Journal of Commerce. We are a literally almost 200-year-old publication. We started like pre-Civil War.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy actually. When people talk about legacy media, like we are really legacy media, in a good way.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably get into this, but so I mean, I think we're most prominently known as like covering the container shipping market, and definitely we have I would say like a bent toward companies that are managing like international containerized supply chains, but most of those, if not 100% of those supply chains, have a domestic leg in the US, right? I mean, no one is buying stuff.
It'd be hard to find one that doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, you're not like, no one's unloading a container at the port and then like having a yard sale, at the terminal, right? So
unless there's theft, that's actually what they try to do.
well, yeah, exactly. That's a side business that we don't cover so much, except to have, a little bit of how to avoid it. So I cover tech. So I cover like pretty much every mode. I don't do air and parcel all that much, but like LTL, which I know is your world, truckload, little bit of intermodal, little bit of rail, and then a lot of ocean, a little bit of air. But ocean, and I would say ocean and truckload and LTL are the areas that I focus on the most. And it's really like across all the software categories, all the data providers that cater to those spaces. Cool. So yeah, it's a lot. It's probably too much for one person, honestly. So,
and then you're pretty involved in the inland distribution. Like, is that twice a year that you guys have conferences?
We have 3 actually. We have TPM is probably the one that everyone knows us the most for. That's the big like kind of shipping focused conference that's now gone kind of global. Inland is kind of like my baby. That's the one I really care a ton about. Where we look a little bit more in depth at truckload, LTL, intermodal. That's in Chicago in fall. And then we do a project and break bulk cargo event in New Orleans too. That's just coming up in 3 weeks. So 2 weeks. What am I saying? 2 weeks.
And you live in DC, right? Because I remember I was there. I tweeted about it, and then you're like, "What are you doing? Why didn't you say anything?" I'm like, I didn't know.
I live in Alexandria, so I'm like out of the blast radius of DC, but close enough where I can say I'm in the DC area. So
cool.
Yeah.
One thing that I didn't know, because I'm a Midwest dude, like I just am in Fargo and I don't travel. I do travel all the time, but not to where people think I would travel. I go to warehouses in the middle of nowhere. I visit customers if I'm traveling. Yeah. And I do that maybe 3 or 4 times a month, but it's always to a warehouse in the middle of Ohio or into Detroit. I'm never really in DC, but I was visiting a warehouse there. And I didn't realize that there's like 5 states or so that you end up going through. I was like, wait, I think this address for my hotel is wrong. It says it's in Virginia. No, it was right. And then I looked at the warehouse address and it said it was in Maryland.
Yeah.
And I was confused. It's just you want to disorient the Midwest guy, put him in there.
It's not like, I grew up in the West Coast, so I'm used to the giant states where it takes like 6 hours to drive out of your state. So where I am right now, Maryland could be northwest of me, north of me, east of me, and southeast of me. So it's like, it sort of,
That's actually pretty
belongs.
impressive.
Yeah. And like, if I drive up to New York, I go through like 6 states and DC. So it's pretty nuts.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's get into it a bit. So one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about and have you on the show is talking about AI, but not the application that most people in trucking are talking about AI. I'm talking about AI in media and generally in media, but we can go as broad or narrow as you want.
Yep.
My post last week was that I don't see how journalism survives, or at least journalism as it is today, because I can just vibe code or vibe market maybe a newsletter, and it is mostly correct. I hardly, and I used to use AI to help me write newsletters.
Yeah.
Now it can write it all, and all I have to do is say, you know what? Could you change the tone?
Yeah.
I used to have to say, you screwed that up.
Yeah.
I can't even start with you.
Let me put some
But it's getting closer.
Gabe flavor on top of this, but
Yeah, and then I make it my own
yeah.
voice, but I have never, for a long time now, maybe like 3 or 4 months, I haven't just started with a Google Doc and just started typing. I type my ideas to ChatGPT, although I use Grok now because I like the copy better. But I just talk to it and it helps me write it, which then it becomes, okay, well, are journalists doing the same thing? And how do they stay ahead of a story? Is it widely available? I guess maybe sources and things that Grok couldn't find would be an angle. But what's your broad take if I was going to say, hey, media is going to move into everybody can do it? What's your pushback on that? And then we can discuss.
Well, I don't necessarily have pushback on that, but I think like we're sort of probably 20 years into something that AI, the Gen AI tools have sort of inserted themselves to and are maybe accelerating. So I started at a newspaper. My first job was at a newspaper in 98. At that point, I was in an office with like 30 people. I was literally, trucking thinks it was the only one who was using green screens. I was literally typing stories on a green screen, like monitor, right? We had, I think, if I recall correctly, I think we had 2 internet enabled PCs in the office for 30 reporters to share, to like get MapQuest to go talk to an interview, or to go to a press conference and find out where it was, or to like just do like legal research on someone.
MapQuest. I mean, for some listening, I've got some marketing and sales hires that are 23.
They don't know what that means.
I at least remember, and I'm 31, but MapQuest, you would like get it and you'd print it off.
Yeah.
And it was like 10 pages.
Oh yeah.
You'd have to like bring them in the car with you.
Okay. I'm really dating myself here. I grew up in Southern California. I'm not sure if this was across the country, but we had these guides called the Thomas Brothers guides. It was literally, it was like a spiral bound encyclopedia of every part of Southern California, which is massive. And it would be in quadrants. So if you got a street address, you would go into the back, look at where that street address would be, and it would give you like a quadrant on a page. And then you would flip to that page and go G6, and it would tell you that's where it is. And then you would have to go and figure out how you were going to get there.
Yeah, it didn't give you step by step.
It didn't give you step by step. And MapQuest was like a major advance at that point, obviously long before Google Maps. But so, yeah. But just to give you a picture of like that environment, we were just getting to terms with what the internet meant to publishing, right? And it's been like, everybody knows the story now. Internet killed classified ads. Classified ads were this huge revenue source that sort of like kept newspapers like profitable enough to like hire journalists, right? And that when that goes away, then the whole journalism industry struggles with understanding how to like hire intelligent people who are good at their job, pay them well enough to keep them doing it, not be like beholden to anybody, but still keep the lights on and, make a profit for somebody down the road. And then a bunch of private equity buys and rolls up a bunch of newspapers and load it with a bunch of debt that they're never going to have a chance of servicing, kill a bunch of them, 7 titles roll into one, skeleton staff. It's a terrible product relative to what it used to be, but still a necessary product for like these small communities that are where, you know, the New York Times or you are not covering what's going on at the city council meeting there, right? So
the Tribunes and the
yeah,
Gazette.
the daily, whatever, you know, the word is in your community that means something, you know? And so, like the need for that has not gone away. And some of that need has been absorbed by people who just have websites and they don't have to like publish physical, they don't have physical distribution. They just have websites.
Yeah.
And that was happening even when I was just starting out, like that was happening then. So fast forward to now, right? Like we're now, I would say 10 years into this phase where people's sort of under the radar mistrust of media, like media as a whole, has morphed into like open hatred and total mistrust of like, especially the bigger the mainstream outlet, the more they feel.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? 2012, it was like, if the New York Times said it, I believed
it was gospel. It was gospel.
And
yeah.
I'm not saying it's as bad as what X and the Town Square would say it is, but I mean, almost everybody I talk to now goes, "Oh, that's mainstream media."
Right.
And it's
like a derogatory term, like
yeah.
definitely a derogatory term.
Have you even checked your sources? Yeah. Well, no, you can't use the Wall Street Journal. You have to. And it's like, wait, what am I supposed to
you know,
check?
depending on who you are, you can either trust the Wall Street Journal editorial page or you can trust the Wall Street Journal front page, because those are two different groups and very different mindsets. And depending on where you are in the spectrum, you trust one and not the other. So there's even within the same outlet, there's like all these weird layers, right? And I don't have the answers. If I had the answer, I'm sure someone would be paying me a lot of money to figure this out. I'm not sure how you sort of put the genie back in the bottle. And maybe you don't. I think maybe what happens is we've just permanently morphed into a different type of landscape. I think the post you had said is like, how does like mainstream media compete with an individual's ability to like put together information and disseminate that information to the masses. Right?
And it looks now with
super
like
slick.
Lovable and Manus, it looks like their websites.
Yeah.
So that was what was kind of holding it back, was distribution. Now that's like, oh,
totally.
I can click buttons, vibe code, and it looks the same as Wall Street or New York Times.
It looks really polished.
It's not a funny little newsletter with memes that I do, but I could make it look official. I don't, but what's stopping somebody from doing that? And then how does somebody differentiate my newsletter if I posted it that way from a journalist that actually like sourced it? And then it becomes maybe individuals. And you were kind of talking about it before the show. It becomes like what voice do they trust, rather than just some internet guy that just put it up.
So I think what you're sort of getting at, like, there's a couple different things. One is, how do you generate the information that you're putting out? And information meaning something that's like intelligence that a company could use. Like, I think of it from the Journal of Commerce perspective, people pay to access what we write. So obviously they think it can help them do their job better. That's like my North Star, is like, the person who's reading my story, can they do their job a little bit better today than they did yesterday? If you're talking about mainstream, it's more like informing the population or entertaining the population, depending on what the story is. Some people would say it's both, but like, I'm just going to do like the traditional, like covering a war or covering a press conference is one thing, and then writing about like what cool movie is out and what you want to cook for dinner tonight, that's like the entertainment side. So I think historically the outlet or the publication was the thing that people trusted. And then secondarily, they may have trusted like columnists, but individual reporters didn't have as big a voice. And what we've seen now is individual reporters and individual writers have a stronger voice and a more trusted voice, right? And maybe the outlet actually has a negative correlation when it comes to trust. And so I don't know how that all plays out. I do know that, like, I mean, the way I think about it is, I individually have to have a strong, like, my reputation is my only currency. If people think I'm writing about, like, if I did a story where I quoted you and people think, oh, well, he's only doing that because Gabe paid him to write it, or Gabe said something flattering about him somewhere else. That erodes my people's trust in what I write. So as soon as I lose a little bit of that, I can lose a lot of it. That's me personally. Now, the company I work for thinks about that aggregate across everybody who works and writes for us, right? So if another reporter does something similar to what I just described, that's going to not directly affect me, but it's going to indirectly affect me. So individually, everybody needs to be responsible enough to care about their own brand. But also, if you're working for a publication, especially one that's sort of like under fire right now, you have to get together and be like, we are only as strong as the weakest link right now, because people are just keying on any mistake that we make. So, I mean, I look at it like politically too, right? Like, say, one party is trying to like get a message across to the US population. As soon as one like congressperson breaks ranks and goes, this is all a bunch of nonsense, like, or forget that, say they say something really stupid, like easily disprovable, like the sun rises in the west every morning, and I know that for a fact, like that erodes the whole party's ability to get that message across. And so you have to think about it the same way now. Like, people are looking for a reason to not trust things anymore. So don't give them a reason to not trust you.
I'm going to shift a little, and we were talking AI and media. The way that I've been listening to some podcasts on this, so I'm just trying to regurgitate it. But like OpenAI and the New York Times have a big lawsuit, I'm pretty sure. Right. And New York Times is like, hey, you used our proprietary data to train your model, and you didn't pay us. And so if that ends up in New York Times' favor, which isn't just for New York Times, basically in media's favor, that these LLMs have to pay royalty or whatever it might be to use the data, that flips the entire script, because then people like you and JOC and others and the big media, Wall Street Journal, that's how they monetize instead of subscriptions. The AI tools will use them for training, and then other people will redistribute it. But you have to have the original source every time. And so that's kind of like, that's got to be a bunch of money being spent to figure out how they can win that lawsuit. And there's probably everybody has a vested interest in New York Times winning that.
I mean, it depends on if your model is like a lot of companies have moved to, and we've never wavered. Like we didn't go free and then we've been subscription, because it's like, that's how we're held accountable. Our renewal rate, right? Like, just like if you serve a customer and they come back, you did something right. If they don't come back, you didn't do well enough for them. Same with us, right? Like, if our renewal rate is good, that means we're solving something for them. So that's how we keep ourselves accountable, really. But monetization models, geez, I probably should think about this more than I do, but I think that is more of a case of like the Times being like, we have a certain amount of, we've invested a certain amount into having the ability to cover almost any story on earth. And if someone is just going to mine that for free, like, how do we charge the same amount that we could? And then we can't keep funding, the thing that separates us. So I think the bigger thing that you were asking about is the AI piece, and like, can you generate like information or journalism better through an AI model than a human can? And I guess the one, I'm obviously biased on this. By the way, every journalist is biased. Journalist who tells you they don't have biases,
you mean they're humans?
Is lying. Yeah, of course. The job is not to not be biased. The job is to put your biases aside and write as if you don't have any bias.
As best you can.
Yeah,
and always admit that maybe I didn't do it well enough that time.
Absolutely.
But if people are like, I would never be biased, then you end up with distrust.
You're automatically lying if you say you have no bias. You're unbiased, right? You have to be, the word I use is dispassionate. You have to be dispassionate about every topic you write about. Like, okay, I love talking to you. I wish the best of success for your business, but I can't write a story pinning my hopes that you are a $10 trillion company, right? Like, that's just not right. So, the in terms of the AI, like generating journalism, or even I would say, like, I would even broaden this out to, like, you see a lot of companies, tech companies especially, sort of promoting themselves as media companies. you have a podcast, you're a media company technically now, right? Like it or not. I would say the difference, and you are different because you're interviewing people and getting other perspectives. But if you're using AI to generate like an informational piece, that's one thing if it's an explainer. Like if it's saying, oh, this is how this works. We have enough knowledge about this to draw from like the general base of knowledge around like how LTL rating works, right? And how it may be changing, right? There's a big enough like store of information to draw from that and generate an article that makes perfect sense and no one would quibble with. Where a person comes in, and I think it will be hard for AI to mimic this, is the person has to go about their business as if their trust is the most important thing. Trust in them is the most important thing they do.
Yep.
And then I interview you, and I interview Curtis Garrett, and I interview Lance Healy, and I interview like everyone I know who's smart about LTL. And I say, what is the nuance to this that I'm not understanding? What are some like edge cases where this is going to be really hard for a shipper or a carrier to account for? Like, how is this going to impact a broker? Like I would ask you, how is this going to impact an LTL broker if this happens? Yep. AI is not yet at the point where it's like knows that question.
It doesn't have the inference ability.
Yeah, and it doesn't know to ask you that question. And it doesn't know how to ask it to you in a way that you feel comfortable divulging that information.
True.
So the journalist's job is to like build trust with the network of sources so that you can report on stuff in a way that the audience has trust in you, right? If that makes sense.
True. I actually think I agree with you on that point. And I think that like Megyn Kelly's a good example of where you talked about like an organization versus an individual. And then like individuals now have all the trust, whether they deserve it or not. They have their community and their trust. And now I'm pretty sure she started like a whole network and like other people are joining her network.
Yep.
She's a savvy businesswoman. So you look at it that way and you say, yeah, the journalist, I actually think would be upstream of the AI information, and that like the AI models are going to use journalists' info.
Yeah.
Hopefully, hopefully they pay them. And even if they don't, but one thing that I think is going to get obliterated is that it's too easy for me. I've been in LTL for 10 years now. I know most of LTL pricing, rating, NMFC codes, limited access deliveries, and I've memorized it and I've lived it. And it's interesting. You can't actually know LTL until you do the industry because there's nobody who trains well. And SMC3 could say that they have training courses, but it's not real world. And so nobody knows LTL. And I know that because I've hired 45 people and tried to teach them LTL. It's really hard.
Yeah.
But Blue Grace and Unishippers and Worldwide Express and Global Trans, I'm trying to be equal opportunity here. Echo Global Logistics. They all, for like the last 10 years, have written blog posts, how to file a freight claim, and they post it online.
Yeah.
How to avoid limited access, how to determine if it's density based or if there's a specific NMFC code. And now all I have to do is go to Grok and say, hey, write me a newsletter about how to file a freight claim. Yeah. And anybody could do that. And then I just add my, oh, actually, that's not right. Or I would go into more depth about that. And I just sprinkle that type of media. I don't know how Google, like SEO, and I'm kind of bouncing here, but SEO, that's why they did the blog posts.
Right.
I don't know if that matters as much anymore because it's all about distribution now. It doesn't matter if you had the backlink to your website, if the customers are coming from different sources and they're like, well, Rocket now put this out and it's new. Yeah. It was repurposed.
Yeah.
But it's just information.
Oh, I think,
not
what you're hitting on is like, so for instance, Wall Street Journal yesterday had a very interesting explainer story about how to understand what was going on with the tariffs.
Yeah.
And it was really well written, and it wasn't like a journalism like scoop or anything like that. It was just, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to know. That type of piece used to be kind of like a bedrock thing when things were going crazy in some, whether it was the whole world or in some industry. I think over time, those become less important because of what you just described. Like everyone at this point could pull using Grok or whatever. Like we have to use at S&P where I work, we have to use an internal proprietary like
Yeah,
LLM,
for data
right?
security.
Yeah, for data governance, right? Exactly. And so that could pull a story like that. That could create a story like that, and then you just top it with, and here's what the specific tariffs are on this country and this country and this country, right?
Yeah, and you're the expert in the fact that you can say, actually, you messed that piece of info up. You said May 2nd, but it was actually May 5th.
Or it applies
you
to
can
these
just quickly
countries,
correct.
and yeah, these are carve outs. And yeah, then you apply your
India is exempt, but not Vietnam, and like you can kind of just go through it. But those types of pieces are easy for anybody to make now.
But yeah, they are. But the flip side, so that just puts more importance for a reporter and the outlets they work for to focus on the things that are not easily producible, even if they look like useful to the audience. Because, so, I mean, we're not going to report on something, for instance, that we know 100 news outlets are going to have a story on in the next 30 minutes. There's no point in us doing the 101st version of that. What we would do is we would talk to our network of sources to get some piece of information about what that thing means to differentiate it from the other 100 different places you can go and find that piece of information.
And I think that another question I had for you is I wanted to kind of pull back the curtain on how some of the industry works in logistics. So I see zero. I might say zero. There's maybe one or two CEOs of big brokerages or big logistics companies talking publicly at all about anything ever. And I've always wondered why, because the startup CEOs always do.
Right.
And that's a differentiator. But they talk to somebody, and like they're quoted in source as anonymous sources, or they're actually quoted in articles all the time. I think it's going to force the executives of big companies to actually have to start be a little bit more public facing and make statements. I know that some of them are, obviously most of them are publicly traded, and that's why they don't make any comments. But I think this will kind of force, because there's just always such a mad dash for a story, I guess, or an angle, especially now we're going to talk about tariffs. Like that had to have been, your last couple of weeks had to have been a pretty big whirlwind. I imagine that you're tired.
Totally. Yeah, lots of conversations. It's been interesting. I mean, like for me, it's like I was talking about before we started recording, like I don't have to move any freight. I don't have to calculate any duties on my products. So I just have to like inform people. So it's a little bit easier, but yeah. No. Well, okay. So this is a very interesting topic, actually. I think there was a theory like a few years ago that like the startup version of whatever company that's like an incumbent was going to force the incumbent to change the way they interacted with the market. Yeah. So Ryan Peterson at Flexport is probably like
he
like
talks a lot. He types fast.
He does type fast. According to him. So that's maybe not trustworthy, right? Like according to him, he types fast, but we need a neutral party to confirm that. But he's like the sort of like prototypical example of a founder who's like the face of the franchise, right? And I think what we've seen is we haven't seen like the CEO of Kuehne + Nagel, and we haven't seen the CEO of Expeditors, which never talks at all.
I don't even know who they are.
Expeditors,
and I pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. We've not seen them rush to be like have their face be the face of their company, much less the entire industry, the way that Ryan does. Why is that? I think they still feel there's like a lot more to lose by doing that than there is to gain, and Ryan has a very counter like sort of perception of what a founder's job is to like evangelize the brand within the industry and even outside of the industry. Like I used to joke, he wanted to make Flexport like the Kleenex of logistics, like the name that everyone attached to.
Yeah. Do you have a Flexport load? And you got a Kleenex? You mean a tissue? No.
Yeah. Like, cause I mean, for a lot of people, like I have a friend who lives near me, who's in the world of like, who's in tech. He's in like insure tech, and he knows of Flexport. He's like, oh yeah,
he's on CNBC and he's on Squawk and he's all over the place. He's on the All In podcast whenever the COVID container crisis.
All over the place. He's like he's very well exposed, I would say. So, to take it back to like the brokers, I think if anything, the experience of what happened to Convoy probably makes them a little gun shy to be like very outspoken about.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
It's hard to go on stage and give speeches about like digital broker versus traditional, and 3 days later your company's
You're
bankrupt.
gone. Yeah.
I
And
mean, or maybe that was actually not 3 days later, but it wasn't
it
long.
wasn't long. Yeah. It was
It's hard to be that public and fail.
right.
Even though everybody fails all the time on like daily micro failings. It's just people don't like to fail publicly. That's why they don't build publicly.
That's very true. That's very true. Well, the stakes are high too, right? Like for you, the stakes of building your company are high because they're high for you. But if you're if you're the CEO of Global Trans or CH Robinson or something, like the stakes are high for a lot of people, not just you.
Yeah.
Right? So there's definitely reticence to be on like overexposed. And
yeah,
there's also the fact that like, okay, so if I want to quote, say I'm covering something about the market where I want a large freight broker to comment, am I going to get the most informational quote from the CEO, or am I going to get the most informational quote from the person who's responsible for the thing that I'm covering?
At a big company, it's the latter.
The CEO is responsible for running the business, but they're not necessarily like owning customer relationships or can tell me how like the TMS is being implemented or whether their agent network is running effectively or not. Like, so for my purposes, if we have someone on stage or I'm doing a story, I'd much rather have the person who's like right on top of that issue than the person who has a better title but is less like informed on that issue or less like read in on that issue, I would say.
It's a parallel to like most of the panels when there's a shipper client or a shipper on a panel, it's the director of logistics or the VP. It's not the CEO of Campbell's.
Totally.
They're not going to know. They're going to say, I think we spend a lot of money on shipping. I just know that.
we had the transportation director for Campbell's at Inland last year. So totally. That's exactly right. He was much more equipped to answer the questions that we had than his CEO would have been.
Yeah. So let me push you a different direction here. Just talking about logistics in general, and then we're going to come back to tariffs. But how do you see the landscape in logistics? Like you cover it, you cover ocean, but obviously a lot of it has an entail in domestic.
Yep.
How do you see the market right now? What do you hear? Like a lot of people talked about wishful thinking. It's just human nature. We all want it to recover.
Yeah.
I do not, but I'm a contrarian because we're building quickly and we're growing fast in the down market. I'd like it to stay down for as long as it will. But I understand why people
when there's
want
blood in the streets, right? So,
I can compete. I'm leaner. We have fewer people. We have better margin and we can compete. But high level, what do you see right now if we didn't have the tariffs? So like X this week, up until last week, before this huge tariff announcement, what were you hearing? Was there signs of recovery? And I don't mean like, hey, there was tender rejections or DATS data showed uptick in flatbed. I don't know, those things. But just generally, what are people saying?
I mean, I think it's very hard to strip out the tariffs completely because it has such a I would say like a psychological impact on things more than even like.
Yeah, it hasn't quite impacted, although I've seen that containers volume is like disappearing because people were holding off to figure it out.
Definitely bookings were down a bit, at least before we're recording this as a 90-day
ago.
Like literally a 90-day pause on tariffs was announced.
1 week later. He did wait a whole week. I don't think people thought he'd wait that
I guess
long.
is going to be the key day going forward. But so I would say what we were hearing is like we were hearing mild signs of like the having reached the bottom and getting a little stability upward, but still very much like a shipper's market, both in truckload and LTL, right? Like, and by that I mean favorable pricing, capacity not hard to find, which ultimately is what most shippers care about, and on the truckload side, like more and more interested in dedicated and private. So that
Yep.
to me says like the price is good. I want to control service because I can afford a little bit more because the price is so low. So we were kind of ticking along this like continued shippers market that seemed to have some signs of life on the capacity side, it turning in their favor, but also like just forget about like the tariffs that were announced. There is a little bit of uncertainty, like consumer demand, like the holdover from inflation, like where things were going with our trade policy, where things are going, like that has an impact on the economy and it has an impact on consumer sentiment, and all that stuff matters to the market, so
I'll pause you there. It's my opinion is that it actually matters. All those things matter, and they're just never talked about until Wall Street is hurting,
sure,
and then it's everybody talks about Wall Street.
totally.
And I'm not like saying what Basent is saying, like it's not a Meg 7 problem, it's a Meg 7 problem, not mega. But what I am saying is that Wall Street is so crucial for Main Street. It's all connected, but no one talks until Wall Street's hurting, and then it's like, hey, things are going really poorly, and the world's attention is on it. That happened in March of 2020 as well, when the Wall Street crashed. Different reason, but same reaction. And then supply chain, it's kind of funny. Suddenly, during the COVID crisis, when everything crashed and like there was no freight moving, and now somehow executives of shipping companies are like the experts at everything. And I just kind of laugh at it because I'm like, I have no idea. I mean, I have an idea. I feel like I can learn quickly and take info and synthesize it maybe, but I'm not a tariff expert.
No.
But there was a lot of them on X. They know exactly what's going to happen, and they happen to be in logistics. They're like, see, this is what's going to happen, and they're sending out. The amount of emails I've been on from the big logistics companies, not like the LTL carriers, but the forwarders, where it's like, hey, here's we're going to have this event, and here's what's going to happen with the tariffs. I'm like, wow. I don't think you know either.
Yeah, everybody's got a newsletter for their customers these days. So your point earlier, right? Like that's the news dissemination, right? That's another.
Yeah. Now maybe Ryan Peterson or Flexport might be uniquely qualified to know what's going on as far as like volumes and what might happen and where things are being sourced from.
But they're not.
They don't know the impact of a tariff. Yeah. It's a different thing.
They're not even. I mean, they're not. I think they have great data. I think they have strong signals. But they're not uniquely, I would say they're not uniquely positioned. All those forwarders have that same information, but to your point, none of them are sitting in the West Wing right now, like listening in on, or they're not.
What's Basent and Lutnick and Trump's
strategy. They're not on the upstairs phone listening to his conversations with, world leaders, right? So
it's either 4D chess or he doesn't, or like there was no strategy or there's something in between. And now it obviously, today, if you were going to have an opinion, it's like, oh, it was about China the whole time. But I don't actually know if it was, or if that was just a last minute, like, hey, things are actually too bad. Treasury yields are back up to 4.5. Do something. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. Only one person knows.
Exactly. Maybe three. Maybe Basent, Lutnick, and Trump on any given day know what they're going to do. But the interesting part is that I can admit that I don't know.
Right.
And you can admit that you may not know. I think there's just so much perception that somebody in supply chain should have the answer, and they've been shouting it from the rooftops and writing huge articles. And I'm not talking about any one person in particular. There's a bunch of them. So I'm just kind of
it's an opportunity, right? Like, I mean, obviously the number of people I get pinging me with like, hey, do you need to talk to a tariff expert? And I was like, not really, because I have a network of people that I trust for 15 years, and I'm not going to like, rip that up to talk to someone who I've never met with before in the most important time. Like, let's have a chat 6 months ago when this wasn't a big deal, so I get to know you. I'm not going to quote you on the day of like the Super Bowl of your industry, right?
Put me in, coach.
Yeah. So,
and even your articles and others that I've read, most of it is, here's what we think, and here's historically how tariffs work, and here's how it relates to inflation and supply and demand. But no one actually, any article that's like, hey, this is what's going to happen, I'm like,
everything is very historic. We don't even get into maybe that. That's not our lane. Our lane is not to predict like what economic impact tariffs have or what consequences they have from like a duty percentage. Ours is like, this is what this is what they were raised to. This is what we're hearing is the impacts that it's having right now. Yeah, agreed. Everyone who projects too much confidence, there's a ton of people who are like, the ambulance chasing on this. Honestly, they're like, oh, there is a crisis. How do I market my thing to take advantage of that crisis?
Yeah, need freight savings because the tariffs are hurting.
Right.
Call Rock. I'm like,
right.
no.
Right. Do you have mild to severe tariff exposure?
Call 866 877.
Use Sky Rizzy.
Sky Rizzy. Skibbity toilet Riz. That's what the kids are saying these days. So, but in reality, like I've been in logistics 10 years, but I started Rocket 5 years ago, coming up on 5 years. So, well, when I was in LTL, even at my old company, the shippers, e-commerce brands in particular, are worried about tariffs. They were worried about being, what was the term during COVID? It was like necessity or like necessary, you had to like have a special qualification. Did we fit in that?
And we had customers. What was
like a necessity or whatever it was. I'll have to look it up after the show.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But so I remember getting emails, and like I had a client, and they're still our client, but they are out of Canada, and they're Wayfair's like one of their biggest suppliers of furniture, and they're one of their biggest customers for the wholesale side. And I got copied in an email chain with the CEO of Wayfair. And it's like, hey, are we necessary? Can we keep shipping, basically? Can we keep selling stuff? And I'm sitting there. I was an LTL sales rep, a contractor at the time. And I'm like, you're necessary to me. I am commission only. Do you want me to?
Yeah.
I didn't have AI then, or else I would have written up a really great thesis on why they're, necessary. But I ended up having to give advice. And I'm like, well, you sell desks that go in home offices. I think you get to count.
Yeah.
I think that counts. Or one of my clients was they were selling truck boxes, but a lot of their customers were like military or paramedics or ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, hey, we sell to hospitals.
Everything in hospitals is
and they're like, we're in automotive repair shops. So it was kind of funny. I've gotten the same thing this time. Hey, what do you think of these tariffs? Like, do you think they're going to stick? And I'm like, I'm even less qualified this time. Last time I could be like, you're kind of necessary. Now I'm like, if I was buying stuff from China, I think that I would maybe buy less right now. I don't know. I don't know what the options are, but it does create this cool like dynamic where your customers trust you and you want to be able to give them good advice. I haven't been able to yet. In fact, I've had carriers come to me that are not LTL carriers, but home delivery, that they've come to me and they're like, hey, what are you saying to your clients about this? What are you hearing? I'm like, I don't know. I just know that it's not really fun to talk about. But it is, the reason I say that and bring that example up is that supply chain is so connected to all of the economy, and it's only talked about when there's tariffs or when there's a supply chain pandemic crisis. And then that gets forgotten for a couple of years. And, there was a CEO in freight, and I told you this before, I won't name him, but there's a CEO in freight who was like, hey, I think this is kind of a smokescreen because, we've been down for 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. Welcome to the recession.
Right.
And JP Morgan's predicting maybe a recession. And he's like, hey, I don't think it was because of the tariffs. We've been doing it. We're leading it. So maybe it's coming. I don't know if maybe that was the right chord to strike, but it does bring up a good point that normally supply chain is actually feeling it before everybody else.
Yeah, the canary in the coal mine.
And tariffs were an explosive way, very similar. I almost make a analogy. COVID for e-commerce delivery and like supply chain changes, tariffs for a new market where it was kind of maybe already happening. And this was what did it.
Yep.
But if he pauses them and maybe it doesn't crash or do anything crazy, there was a lot of indicators that it wasn't going well anyways.
I mean, okay. So, I mean, what you hit upon before we got into like whether freight is like a leading indicator is this whole idea of like logistics is like the offensive line, right? Like totally unobservable until one guy misses a block and your quarterback gets sacked, basically, right?
Yep.
Which I think it's like a cliche at this point, but cliches are cliches for a reason, right? Like it's absolutely true.
Doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah. And in terms of like whether we all saw what the bigger kind of economy is now experiencing because of this forcing function of the tariffs earlier. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone not and like I don't think this is even political to say. Like I think everybody on both sides of the aisle in the US has been wondering what our long-term relationship with China is. Right?
Yeah.
Like that is a relationship that needs to be examined. Now you can take again, I'm going to be dispassionate about this. Doesn't mean that in my brain I don't have thoughts about it, but like you can take the opinion that things are a lot more benign than they appear to be, certainly on X.
Yeah.
Definitely in the White House right now, and that we are two giant economies with two pretty strong like opinions on how things are done, but we also trade an insane amount back and forth.
Like $500 billion or
Well,
something
that's
crazy.
just one way, right? It's like a
Yeah,
trillion
that's
both
just us
ways, right?
coming in.
And we also influence individually and collectively every other economy in the world. And so the fact that we get along at all is kind of a minor miracle, right? So you can take that view. You can take the view that like China has been on a long-term path to undermine what we do and assume the throne that we think we have.
Yeah, if you look historically, dynasties end and there's another one that takes the spot.
Sure. And then you can then like the second order of that is you can take the view that the best way to approach this is like confront them head on, or the best way to approach this is let's galvanize everyone around us to say like who may feel the same way we do and say let's isolate them, the things that we don't like. Now I could go and say, well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that was negotiated and 15 years ago was meant to do exactly that. It was basically every major economy in Asia and a lot in South America going, we are going to set up a free trade agreement that like is intended to purposely exclude China as much as possible. Like you can't, even back then you couldn't get away from them completely. In fact, they were more probably intertwined than they are today. But so these things kind of come in cycles. And I think what the most interesting thing of all of the stuff that's gone on in the last decade is you have all these weird bedfellows. You have like Democrats siding with neocons and libertarians siding with Democrats, and
it is a bit of a reorganizing.
And it's a total reorganizing. And like there's even day to day, it's like, oh, I vehemently disagree with this guy for what he said for the last 365 days, but then he said something that makes a lot of sense to me, so now I'm like on his side on this issue.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's as cut and dry as like Republican Democrat anymore. Like there's these weird battle lines. It's almost like the middle of the Civil War and you're like trying to figure out if the guy next to me is wearing a blue uniform or like a dark gray uniform, and it's like, wait, are we supposed to be fighting, or are you on the same team as me? Like I don't know,
day to day, not even like month over month.
It's absolutely, issue by issue almost. So
I have to catch myself all the time whenever I'm reading posts. I want to reply and then I go, wait, I do disagree on this one, but actually and then I had to think, I have a sickness. I'm contrarian. Like whatever the crowd thinks, I'm like, well, they're probably wrong, and I'll just go the other way.
This is the Bill Burr. How can I get the audience to hate me as much as possible?
Yeah, so then I just don't post any of it, or I try not to. I can't control myself sometimes. But here's the other thing, and I want to pivot not away from politics, but towards freight politics. You cover tech. That's what you said, right?
Yeah, I do.
So like, we talked about some big companies building in public and, having public failure, and that's really difficult. And a lot of the Convoy folks actually have now landed somewhere else.
Totally.
I think Dan's at Microsoft. And then I just saw a couple of
Grant.
I want to say the other guy, the founder of Convoy, went to
Goodale.
Ryder.
Yeah, went to Ryder. That's right. Yep.
Which is an interesting move. Ryder has not historically been a tech player. I do like Ryder. I like the folks there. We work with them at Rocket. So Ryder, love you guys. Don't be mad at me if I say anything. But no, I do think.
I mean, they've
I
made
do think.
investments, so
Yeah, it's they're always like growth by acquisition, but it is interesting to see Ryan. Is it Ryan you said, or
Grant.
Grant go in there? But I think that as the market recovers, there will be like truckload brokers, LTL brokers will kind of like get back to normal, and I could get into, we might not have time, the whole squeeze that'll happen on all the brokers when the market does recover, because the shippers will want to maintain their power for as long as can be. The carriers will want their money back. And there will be a massive short squeeze on brokers because there won't be any ability to go get a truck for a good price. But the shippers are contracted in for 12 months. And so you either say no and don't move the freight, or you move it at a loss. And then all the companies like Denim, Haul Pay, all the freight factoring companies are going to be squeezed because it's like negative margin loads. That will happen, and it'll be disruptive for some brokers. But I think the big disruption is actually that like SaaS is going to almost go to zero. Like you won't be able to, and I'm going to piss some people off by saying this, TMS companies won't be able to charge what they charge per shipment and monthly for their services because it will be so easy to build the same tool less, right? So it's like, not quite as cool, but it does what I need it to do.
For a fact.
And as soon as that happens, I don't think it'll create more valuable tech companies. I think it will just distribute all the value back to the shipper, carrier, broker and away from the tech companies in freight.
There are a lot of people who are theorizing this. Like, I don't think you're alone in saying this is where you're not contrarian, right? I think there's a lot of people who are theorizing that where like Gen AI mixed with software development is going is like could definitely squeeze SaaS. So right before I jumped on the call with you, I was talking with a group of shippers, and we were talking about like how AI might impact or is impacting their business and like how they're thinking about it. And one of the things that came out of that was that I asked about, because I've been hearing about this, is like, what if we get to a point, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now or sooner, I don't know, it could happen tomorrow for all I know, is what if we get to a point where someone creates the capability for a broker or a shipper to build an app by prompting with natural language to build an app
vibe coding
that does exactly what that broker would or shipper wants to do. So in other words, you don't have to build SaaS that accounts for all the variances in 1,000 customers. You just have to, you can just build something that's for that customer.
Yeah.
And it's literally as simple as a prompt in ChatGPT or Grok. So,
and then in that scenario, it'll be just like a journalist. The API connections and the connections to the carriers will matter, and they'll have to pay for access to that, and everything else will be like the value will go down. So you still have to be able to transact with a carrier, even if you're going to build an AI agent to prompt it to transact. There has to be an API or a webhook, but the front ends and the fancy bells and whistles and the all-in-one platforms, I don't think they're going to do so well, because I think it'll be all-in-one is the cliche, or like the old, and now it's like I'll just build a widget for one thing at a time, and it'll all sync in with tools like Gumloop or Zapier or whatever back into my Power BI that I want it to be in. I don't need it to be all connected anymore.
I don't think that scenario is too out of whack. I think there's still going to be, for a long time, there's still going to be like a set of enterprises and even like mid-sized shippers who feel very comfortable having a system of record that is provided by a company with a long track record of financial stability. And
they love that.
And they know, and they know that they can run their business on it, even if it's slightly suboptimal and it costs a little bit too much. Like, they don't have to worry about that. There's another.
I mean, MercuryGate still is doing well.
What was that?
So MercuryGate TMS still does well. So
that's a testament to all the TMSs that I covered in the mid 2000s, they all still exist for the most part. Like, it's hard to name. Like, if you look at the Magic Quadrant for TMSs, most of which are shipper based, not broker based, but it's the same names. Like, they can just rerun that thing with a couple new names in the Challenger Quadrant every year. So
they'll be able to do that for a long time still, because logistics is so slow to adopt new tech anyways, and it's so fragmented. But the newer companies are going to struggle because there will just be more new, and they'll just compete. The legacies will be all right. Anybody in the middle that built in the last 5 years, it cost them $10 million to build the TMS
totally.
that now costs $1 million and can be done in a year instead of 3. And by the end of this year, it'll be done in 3 months instead of a year.
Totally.
And then it's like, well, what are we doing here? So word to the wise, don't build a new TMS today. It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think the counter to that, I'll be contrarian to your that is the biggest challenge for software vendors is the fork in the road around do I build a better version of something that exists and I don't have to educate the market on it because they know what it is. I'm just giving it to them, giving a cheaper, faster, easier to implement
Better.
version.
Yeah.
Or do I create a new thing and then I spend 2 to 3 years explaining why they need to invest in it and why it's different and how it fits into the things they've already sunk cost into. That's more challenging, but obviously there's more upside to that.
Yeah, it's a bigger risk. You might get a VC fund to be more interested in the new than the, hey, let's just replace. But I know there's companies right now. I should correct myself. You can build a TMS today if you build it in a niche.
Yeah.
But don't build an all-in-one TMS to compete with an all-in-one TMS to compete with an all-in-one. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yep.
Unless you're going to do it contrarian and just open source the whole thing. Then maybe do it.
The way to build it is maybe the way to do it is to build a TMS or call it a TMS, but build what we talked about, where it's like there's like a field where you just prompt and you're like, how many loads do I need to tender today? And then it just lists them, or run a report. You're just literally prompting it in natural language for the information you need. Are you saying tender these 5 things out to these 6 carriers, figure out the best, thing to do? And maybe that's what TMS becomes. And so that people are like, oh, I'm comfortable with the idea of TMS. This is a totally different way of doing it, but it accomplishes the same thing.
Is it a totally different way, though, if you think about it? That's just what email was 10 years ago. Here's my loads for the day.
True.
And it was just attachments. If you could, somebody should figure that out. I don't have time for it, but somebody should.
Yeah.
If you could just email, hey, here's everything I have today, but you don't even have to email it. You just go in your little native app in your AI and say, what do I all have today? And it goes into NetSuite and says, here's what you got. And it's like, dispatch it all, but hold that order. It's on back order.
Right.
And then it like goes and talks to every system it would need to and comes back and says, here you go. It does. You don't need to provide it PDFs. You don't need to provide load information. No data entry. That could happen. But I want to ask you a question to end the episode. I wish I could talk longer. I have to go to a meeting. I'm sure you have some stuff to do. But
Tariffs.
And there's some new updates.
Yeah.
What's one thing, and I always ask all the business owners and executives, and obviously they have on what one mistake they've made that if they could do it again, they wouldn't have to make that mistake. So that if someone's listening, they can just avoid that one. And it can't be one that you think is like formative to how you got to where you're at, because you take one thing out, it might not end up the way it is. But there's got to be something stupid you've done that's like, actually, you know what? That was just stupid. I didn't need to do that. And it slowed me down. Is there anything, maybe it's just life advice, maybe it's media specific, but what do you got?
That's a great question. I mean, I have the advantage of like not having to think about this from like a business owner or operator perspective, because I've always had the fortune of just being like a salary. For people who don't care about like controlling destiny in the way that like business owners do, I've had the ability to go like, well, I like getting a paycheck twice a month, and anything I do is hopefully not going to be so awful that it sinks the entire company that I work for, but it's going to rebound on me. So yeah, I mean, like I probably don't have any like major life lessons.
What about career advice then?
Yeah, I would say
you've been a careerist, and there's a lot of people out there that are listening that aren't business owners that this is more relevant for them.
I would say that I think my biggest thing I would go back and change is I would have focused on specializing a lot earlier. it took me a long time to get to a point where I realized that your value goes up as you narrow your aperture, kind of, and like when I first started out, first of all, actually what I would really do, I would have really gone back to myself in high school and been like, dude, don't go into journalism. There's no money in journalism. Dude, like do something where you can make money, and then later in life you can write whatever you want, right? Because it won't matter, right? That would have been
my dang early.
That would have been actually as a joke. My one of my best friends, he and I met at a newspaper, and he said, like in our early 20s when we were making like absolute peanuts, we were like, what we should do is just go on like a road show to different colleges and to journalism schools and be like, don't do it, run away, go run the opposite direction.
You get a sponsor.
Yeah, like the scared straight
for the trip to tell people not to.
Yeah, like the scared straight thing. Like, don't end up like me, But
don't end up like Eric.
I honestly, I would have, if I could go back, I would have been like, don't wait 5 years, don't wait 10 years to specialize. Like the earlier you specialize, the more information you accumulate, the more network you accumulate, and the more valuable you become to people because you're super deep within that niche that you focus on. So
yeah, and then a business owner's perspective, most entrepreneurs start with that exact laser focus. They're going to fix a small problem that'll make them a lot of money or fix something in the industry. Some entrepreneurs, which I'm not one of them, are like, I'm going to change the industry and I'm going to go like fundamentally change how everything works. I've always been more like, hey, there's a way to do it and I'm going to iterate on that and then I'm going to create value in that niche. But then the big temptation is to de-specialize, to do all things, because your customer says, hey, do you do international? Totally. And you're like, well, there's a revenue opportunity. We could do international. Totally. How hard could it be? I did that when I was a sales rep back I was shipping pallets of coffee for Black Rifle Coffee Company to like military bases around the world. But I had no idea like
You're
how
an international logistics specialist.
Yeah. They asked me and I said, I'm sure I could figure it out. And we did, but it was over Christmas and they were donating it to all the troops and it was high pressure. Like they needed this to be done. If anybody's ever tried to ship to a military base, there is no address.
Yeah.
So then like the guy who also didn't know how to do it at the international company I worked for, he's like, hey, I need the addresses. I'm like, no, you're not understanding.
There's not even coordinates on the map.
Yeah. There's like, it's just 3 letters, AP or APO or A, something like that. I'm like, so I actually called my brother-in-law who's was in the Air Force. And I'm like, how do you do this? And he helped me. So don't be all things to all people. It's actually, in a career standpoint, you end up doing all things and it seems like the right way. And you start to specialize. And a business owner, you start specializing and get distracted.
Yep.
Shiny object syndrome. So that's a cool inverse there. The same lesson.
Yeah. I mean, so. I would say the other thing I learned is like small errors get magnified. And so I learned, every reporter goes through a thing where like you make a mistake in a story and you feel like shit and you feel like you let everybody down. You let the reader down, you let the person who you interviewed down, you let your boss down, and you kick yourself, you beat yourself up for it like crazy. And then, but those things you learn from it. So it's like even a small error, even if you think it's a small error, it really can, you don't realize how those things can magnify. So it just makes you focus on, like, you're never going to be perfect, but it really makes you focus on, like, I have to start by doing no harm, So
yeah, measure twice, cut once. All right, Eric, I appreciate it. You got some stuff to write about markets. You got to talk to some people about tariffs. It's a 90-day pause. That's going to be not breaking news by the time this releases next week, and it will be completely different than what I'm talking about now.
It'll either be 15-day pause or 150.
I believe in that prediction. It will not be the same next week when this gets released, but I appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you.